The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the emergency beacon flashed across every screen. Ambassador Uriel of the Theron Collective stood at the central podium, her crystalline form shimmering with distress. Around the circular hall, representatives from 47 species watched the live feed with growing horror. "The situation is critical," Uriel announced, her voice translator conveying the tremor in her words. "A HFY War fleet has surrounded civilian convoy Delta 7 in the Outer Rim. Approximately 7,000 refugees from 12 species are trapped. The HFY commander demands complete surrender of all cargo and technological assets within 6 hours, or they will begin executing hostages." The holographic display showed the scene clearly. 15 HFY warships, each bristling with weapons, had formed a cage around a cluster of civilian transports. The refugees had been fleeing a solar collapse in the Metrian system. They were families, children, elderly individuals. They had nothing except what they could carry and the hope of reaching safety. Council member Thorax of the Brintali Confederacy slammed his manipulator appendage against his desk. "This is an outrage. The HFY have violated 17 interstellar treaties." "Treaties mean nothing to raiders," responded Councillor Mevesh, her feline features tight with frustration. "The HFY respect only force. But our nearest military response fleet is 4 days away. These refugees do not have 4 days." The chamber erupted in urgent discussion. The Therons proposed immediate diplomatic negotiation. The Vexillans suggested offering ransom. The Kordathi argued for sanctions and long-term consequences. Each species had protocols, procedures, established methods of response, but none had an answer that would save lives in the next 6 hours. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly in the observer section, her dark eyes fixed on the display. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 2 cycles ago. Barely 20 months by Earth reckoning, the human delegation occupied a small space, neither important nor influential. Most Council species still saw them as the newcomers, the young species that needed guidance to navigate galactic civilization. Sarah leaned forward and tapped her communication panel. "Ambassador Chen of Earth requests permission to address the Council." A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the chamber. Uriel's expression showed confusion, but protocol was protocol. "The human observer may speak, though we remind her this is a matter of extreme urgency." Sarah stood and walked to the secondary podium with measured steps. She was average height for a human, wearing simple diplomatic robes that seemed plain compared to the ornate garments of other species. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "Thank you, Chairwoman Iriel. I have been monitoring the situation. I have also been in contact with Earth Command. We have a vessel in that sector. For USA. Lawning." Thorax made a dismissive gesture. "With all respect to the human delegation, this crisis requires military intervention. Does Earth even maintain warships in the Outer Rim?" "No," Sarah said simply. "We have a freighter. The cargo vessel. Persistence. Captain Marcus Webb commanding. She is approximately 4 hours from the convoy's position." Several council members actually laughed. Councillor Vresh of the Caldoni Commonwealth didn't bother hiding his condescension. "Ambassador Chen, we appreciate Earth's concern, but one cargo ship cannot oppose 15 HFY warships. The HFY are among the most aggressive species known. Their warriors are bred for combat. Surely you understand the mathematics of this situation." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I understand perfectly, Counselor. I am simply informing the Council that Captain Webb has volunteered to respond to the distress call. The Persistence will arrive in approximately 4 hours. This is madness," Mevesh interjected, though not unkindly. "Ambassador Chen, we value human courage, but courage without capability is simply suicide. We cannot allow your people to throw away their lives in a futile gesture." "We're not asking permission," Sarah replied, her tone remaining respectful but firm. "The Persistence is already en route. Captain Webb operates under human law, which requires response to any distress call, regardless of personal risk. It's our oldest maritime tradition. Yiril's crystalline form flickered with agitation. But this will accomplish nothing, except adding human casualties to an already terrible situation. Your species has been part of this council for such a short time. You have no military presence. No established combat doctrine that we're aware of. The Kresh will destroy your freighter in minutes. Sarah walked closer to the main display, looking up at the image of the trapped convoy. Chairwoman, with your permission, I ask only one thing. Keep this live feed active. Allow your sensors to monitor what happens when the persistence arrives. To what purpose? Thorax demanded. So we can witness the futility? No, Sarah said quietly, turning to face the assembled council. Her next words carried a weight that made several species shift uncomfortably. So you can see why Earth was never conquered. Despite invasion attempts by the Terrans, the Skrell, and 3 other species in our region before we achieved spaceflight, despite being from a high-gravity death world where everything evolved to hunt everything else, despite being predators who learned to use tools and fire and nuclear weapons. She paused, letting that sink in. Most council species came from gentler worlds. They had evolved as herd animals, or peaceful gatherers, or symbiotic creatures. The concept of a predator species achieving civilization was uncommon. A predator species from a death world was nearly unprecedented. You see us in these chambers, Sarah continued, gesturing to herself and the small human delegation. We follow your protocols. We respect your customs. We argue with words and vote with raised hands. And you think this is what we are? She shook her head slowly. This is what we choose to be. There is a difference. The chamber had gone very quiet. Even the species most dismissive of humanity were paying attention now. 4 hours, Sarah said. Give Captain Webb 4 hours. If the persistence is destroyed, you will have lost nothing except time you were already wasting in debate. But if you turn off this feed, if you don't watch, you will miss something important. You will miss the moment when humans stop being civilized and remember what we actually are. Yiril considered for a long moment. Finally, she made a gesture of acceptance. Very well, Ambassador Chen. We will monitor the situation. Though I pray to the ancient lights that your confidence is not misplaced. I fear we are about to witness a tragedy. Yes, Sarah agreed, returning to her seat. You are definitely about to witness something. She settled back and opened a private communication channel. On her personal screen, Captain Marcus Webb's weathered face appeared. He was a man in his 50s, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of the universe's darkness. They think we're going to die, Marcus, Sarah said quietly. Webb's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something old and cold and patient. Ma'am, respectfully, the Kresh are the ones who should be worried. I know. That's what concerns me. The council species aren't ready to see what you're about to do. Then maybe it's time they learned, Webb replied. Out here in the black. Pretty words don't stop raiders from killing children. Action does. We'll be gentle as we can be, Ambassador. But we'll be effective first, Sarah nodded. 4 hours, Captain. The whole galaxy is watching. Good, Webb said, and his smile was not a comfortable thing to see. Let them watch. The communication ended. Sarah looked up at the main display, where the Kresh fleet continued its lazy orbit around the trapped refugees. The council members had returned to their debates, discussing diplomatic options and rescue scenarios that would take days to implement. None of them understood yet. They were about to receive an education in what humans truly were, and Sarah suspected the galaxy would never look at her species quite the same way again. The clock counted down. 3 hours and 57 minutes until contact. The Kresh had no idea what was coming for them. The main display in the council chamber showed long-range sensor data as the persistence entered the outer detection range. To the experienced military observers among the Council species, the ship appeared utterly unremarkable. It was a standard human cargo vessel, roughly 300 meters in length, with the blocky utilitarian design common to freight haulers throughout the galaxy. "Sensors confirm human vessel approaching," announced the Theran technician monitoring the feed. Vessel identification: UHMS Persistence. Registered Earth Merchant Marine. Class: Heavy Cargo Transport. Estimated crew complement: 35. Armament readings are minimal. Standard defensive particle screens only. Counselor Vresh shook his head sadly. "They are brave. I will grant them that. But this is suicide." The Kresh commander apparently agreed. His broadcast to the Persistence was filled with contempt. His species stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored exoskeletons and natural weapons that had evolved for brutal efficiency. The Kresh had built an empire on intimidation and violence. "Human vessel. You are interfering in Kresh operations?" the commander growled, his translated voice carrying undertones of amusement. "Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. This is your only warning." "Well, Argan," Captain Webb's response came through crystal clear. Every council member heard the calmness in his voice, the complete absence of fear or hesitation. "Kresh Commander, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the Persistence. You are holding 7,000 civilians hostage in violation of 43 interstellar laws. I am ordering you to release them immediately and surrender your vessels for inspection." The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Several species made sounds of disbelief. The human captain was ordering the Kresh to surrender? One cargo ship against 15 warships? The Kresh commander's laughter boomed through the speakers. "You order me. You dare order me. I will enjoy watching you die. Human. Perhaps before I kill you, I will execute some of these refugees in your honor. Yes, I think I will start with the young ones, the cubs and hatchlings." "You have 1 minute to comply," Webb said, and now his voice had changed. It had dropped lower, gone flat and cold. "After that, we stop asking." The Kresh commander made a gesture of dismissal and cut the communication. "Weapons. Target that pathetic freighter. All batteries. Fire at will." The council members watched in horror as energy weapons lanced out from 3 Kresh destroyers. The bolts of destructive force crossed the distance in seconds, impacts that should have vaporized the Persistence's shields and torn through her hull. But the Persistence didn't try to dodge. She accelerated directly into the weapons fire. "What is she doing?" Mavesh gasped. "That's directly toward the weapons." The first impacts struck the Persistence's forward hull. There was a brilliant flash as armor plating exploded outward. But behind that sacrificial layer was another layer, and another. The Persistence had been built with ablative armor, designed to absorb tremendous punishment by shedding damaged sections while protecting the ship's core. And she was still accelerating. "Impossible," Thorax muttered, leaning forward. "Those hits should have crippled her." Sarah Chen sat quietly in her seat, her expression unreadable. But anyone looking closely would have seen her hands gripping the armrests tightly. The Persistence covered the distance to the Kresh fleet in a quarter of the time military doctrine said was safe. She took 17 direct hits, each one blowing off chunks of armor. But the ship's core remained intact, her engines burning at what sensors indicated was 112% of rated capacity. Then the Persistence was among the Kresh fleet, too close for their heavy weapons to track effectively. And everyone in the council chamber realized something terrifying. The cargo ship was not trying to escape. She was not calling for help. She was attacking. Magnetic grapples shot out from the Persistence's hull, each one trailing a reinforced cable. They locked onto the nearest Kresh destroyer, with impacts that rang through the metal. The human ship's momentum carried both vessels into a spin, but the Persistence's maneuvering thrusters fired in a pattern that stabilized the tumble with frightening precision. "They've maglocked to a warship," the Theran technician reported, her voice rising with disbelief. "Now deploying." Wait. Deploying combat personnel? The display zoomed in, showing hatches opening along the Persistence's hull. Armored figures emerged. Using the maglock cables as bridges, they moved across the gap between ships with the easy confidence of people who had trained for this exact scenario countless times. Human Marines, 30 of them, clad in powered combat armor that made them look like mechanical predators. They reached the Kresh destroyer's hull and immediately began cutting through with plasma torches. Within 90 seconds, they had breached the hull and disappeared inside. "This is madness," Counselor Vresh whispered. "They're boarding a warship during active combat with 30 soldiers." A second group of Marines deployed to another Kresh vessel, using jump packs to cross the larger distance. They moved in perfect coordination. 6 teams of 5, each team covering the others with weapons that the Council's sensors identified as ballistic firearms, primitive by galactic standards, but devastating in experienced hands. Inside the first Kresh destroyer, the Council's feed switched to the ship's internal cameras. What they saw would be discussed in military academies for decades to come. 3 human Marines moved down a corridor where 10 Kresh warriors waited. The Kresh were massive, bred for violence, armed with energy weapons, and protected by personal shields. They should have massacred 3 humans in the narrow confines of the ship. The lead Marine tossed something small around the corner. The Kresh warriors laughed at such a primitive tactic until the flashbang grenade detonated. For 2 seconds, the Kresh were blinded and deafened. In those 2 seconds, the humans struck. They moved like nothing the Council species had ever seen, not like soldiers following doctrine, like hunters who had been hunting since before they discovered fire. They communicated in short, clipped words, each Marine instinctively knowing where the others would be. Their weapons barked in precise 3-round bursts, each burst aimed at gaps in Kresh armor or vulnerable joints. The lead Kresh warrior, a specimen that mass scanners showed weighed over 200 kilograms, charged the humans with a roar. He was fast for his size, and his armor could deflect most weapons, but the Marine didn't try to stop him. She stepped aside with minimal movement, letting the Kresh's momentum carry him past, and her armored fist drove into the joint where his leg armor connected to his hip. The Kresh went down. Before he could rise, 2 more Marines were on him, mag restraints locking his limbs. The engagement lasted 11 seconds. All 10 Kresh warriors were down. The 3 humans had taken no casualties. This pattern repeated across 3 ships simultaneously. The Council members sat in stunned silence as they watched human Marines systematically clear vessel after vessel. The Kresh fought with desperate ferocity, but the humans moved through their ships like water, flowing through cracks, finding every weakness, exploiting every mistake, working together with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. On the bridge of his flagship, the Kresh commander's expression had changed from amusement to confusion to something approaching fear. He opened communication channels, his voice now uncertain. "What are you? You are a cargo ship. Where are your warriors?" Captain Webb's response was almost gentle. "Every human ship carries warriors, Commander. Because every human who goes into space knows the black is dangerous. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. You've made it necessary for us to show you the worst." The Kresh commander watched his tactical display with disbelief as 2 more of his destroyers reported human boarding parties. His crews were falling back, unable to stop the invaders. These humans fought like demons, like predators that had evolved hunting other predators. "You cannot defeat 15 ships with 1 freighter," the Kresh commander shouted. "Watch us," Webb replied. And in the Galactic Council chamber, representatives from 47 species did exactly that. They watched as humanity revealed what they truly were beneath the civilized surface. Not warriors pretending to be peaceful, but peaceful beings who remembered how to be warriors. The hunt had begun, and the Kresh were learning what it meant to be prey. The council chamber had transformed from a place of debate into something resembling a military command center. Every representative was focused on the displays, watching the impossible unfold in real time. The feeds showed simultaneous boarding actions across 6 Kresh vessels now, and the pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. Humans didn't fight like any species the galaxy had encountered. They fought like pack hunters. On the Kresh destroyer Talon of Wrath, internal cameras showed a corridor intersection where 15 Kresh warriors had established a defensive position. They had energy shields, overlapping fields of fire, and the biological advantages of size and strength. By every tactical analysis, 3 human Marines approaching that position should have withdrawn or called for support. The humans attacked anyway. Team 4, advancing on Hardpoint Delta. The Marine's voice came through clearly. The audio was being broadcast to the Council, and the calmness in her tone was unsettling. She could have been discussing lunch, not an assault against overwhelming odds. The lead Marine, her armor marked with sergeant stripes, pulled a device from her belt. She threw it high, bouncing it off the ceiling. The Kresh warriors tracked it with their weapons, shields angling upward exactly as she had intended. In that half-second when their defensive positioning shifted, the other 2 Marines rolled low around opposite corners, their weapons already firing. The Kresh shields were designed to stop energy weapons from typical firing angles. But ballistic weapons coming from ground level, from 2 directions simultaneously, found gaps. 3. Kresh went down immediately. The grenade the sergeant had thrown wasn't explosive, it was a smoke generator, filling the corridor with dense obscurement. The Kresh fired blindly into the smoke. The humans didn't. Their armor had thermal imaging, motion tracking, and networked combat systems that let each Marine see what the others saw. They moved through the smoke like it wasn't there, their weapons speaking in short, controlled bursts. When the smoke cleared 15 seconds later, all 15 Kresh warriors were down. 2 were dead. 13 were restrained and injured. The 3 human Marines were already moving to the next objective, leaving medical drones to treat the wounded Kresh. Counselor Mevesh stared at the display in disbelief. They're treating the enemies they just shot? Ambassador Chen spoke from her seat, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. We fight to win, Counselor, not to commit atrocities. Those Kresh warriors are no longer combat effective, so they receive medical attention. It's the law of armed conflict, Earth version. Even in war, there are rules we follow. But the ferocity, Thorex said, unable to look away from another screen showing a different boarding action. The speed. The precision. This is not the fighting style of a civilized species. It's exactly the fighting style of a civilized species. Sarah corrected gently. We know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Every Marine on those ships has trained for thousands of hours. They know the laws of war better than most species know their own legal codes. They fight hard, because fighting hard saves lives, including enemy lives. A long battle causes more casualties. A quick, decisive victory ends it faster. On the Kresh flagship, the commander was watching his fleet fall apart. 7 ships now had human boarding parties. His warriors were falling back on every vessel, unable to counter the humans' coordinated assault. The reports coming in were increasingly panicked. They move through bulkheads like they can see through them. They know where we are before we arrive. They fight in perfect coordination, like a hive mind. The Kresh commander opened communications to the Persistence again. And this time there was no mockery in his voice. Captain Webb, I demand you withdraw your forces immediately. This is a violation of 1. Of what? Webb's voice cut him off. You took hostages. You threatened to execute children. You fired on a vessel, responding to a distress call. By every law in civilized space, you're pirates. And we have every right to stop you with appropriate force. Appropriate? You call this appropriate? We haven't destroyed a single one of your ships. Webb pointed out. We've disabled some weapons, breached some hulls, but your vessels are intact. Your crew members who aren't actively fighting are unharmed. My Marines are under strict orders regarding acceptable force levels. If we wanted destruction, Commander, you'd already be dead. The truth of those words hung in the air. The Kresh commander looked at his tactical display and realized Webb was right. The humans could have blown holes in his ships. Instead, they had boarded them, risking their own lives to minimize casualties even among their enemies. But there was nothing merciful about how they fought once engaged. Another feed showed a Kresh warrior, a champion of his clan, facing 3 human marines in a cargo bay. He was a massive specimen, over 2.5 meters tall, with exoskeletal armor that could deflect most weapons. He roared a challenge and charged. The Marines moved like a choreographed dance. The left Marine went low, striking at the Kresh's leading leg. The right Marine went high, targeting sensors on the warrior's helmet. The center Marine simply stood her ground, waiting. The Kresh's charge faltered as his leg buckled. His helmet displays went dark. He swung his massive arms, trying to catch any of the humans, but they weren't there. They had already moved, repositioning with fluid efficiency. 4 seconds into the engagement, the Kresh warrior was on the ground, mag restraints on all 4 limbs. He hadn't landed a single blow. "This is wrong," he growled in his own language. "You are small, weak. I am a bred warrior of the Kresh Dominion. I should have crushed you." The Marine who had stood her ground knelt beside him. Her helmet retracted, showing a young woman's face. She couldn't have been more than 25 Earth years old. "Size doesn't matter when you hunt in packs," she said in passable Kresh dialect. "On my world, the apex predator weighs 60 kilograms. She hunts animals 10 times her size by working with her pack. You never stood a chance alone." The council members heard this exchange through the open comm channels. Several species shifted uncomfortably. The implications were becoming clear. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters. They had chased prey across vast distances, wearing down larger, stronger animals through endurance and coordination. When they developed intelligence, they hadn't abandoned those instincts. They had refined them, weaponized them, turned them into a combat doctrine that was devastatingly effective. A Kresh cruiser tried to run. The persistence released it from the maglocks, and for a moment, it looked like the warship might escape. Then 6 human Marines fired grapple guns from the Kresh destroyer they'd captured, their lines crossing 300 meters of space to strike the fleeing cruiser's engine section. They used the cables to swing across the vacuum, their armored forms tumbling through space with their weapons ready. They landed on the cruiser's hull like predators landing on prey. Within minutes, they had cut through and begun the boarding process. "They're insane," Counselor Vresh whispered. "That maneuver had a dozen ways to fail catastrophically. They practice it," Sarah said quietly. "Emergency boarding procedures, vacuum assault protocols. Every human Marine trains for 3 years before their first deployment. They know exactly what they're capable of." The Kresh commander's voice came through again, and this time it carried something the council had never heard from the Kresh before: fear. "Captain Webb, please. We will release the hostages. All of them. Just call off your warriors." There was a pause. When Webb spoke again, his voice had changed. It had gone cold in a way that made several council members shiver, despite the climate-controlled chamber. "You threatened to kill children, Commander. You said you'd start with the cubs and hatchlings. You were going to murder them to make a point." The temperature in Webb's voice dropped even further. "We take that personally, very personally." On the tactical display, the human Marines had secured 9 of the 15 Kresh ships. 3 more were being boarded. The remaining 3 Kresh vessels were trying to flee, their engines burning at maximum as they attempted to escape the system. The Persistence rotated in space with practiced ease. Her civilian sensor arrays tracked the fleeing ships with perfect precision. Her point defense systems, designed to shoot down debris and micro-asteroids, locked onto the Kresh vessel's engine sections. "This is your final warning," Webb said. "Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded, or we will disable your vessels. You will not escape. You will not harm another refugee. You will surrender, or you will be stopped. Choose now." The 3 fleeing Kresh captains chose wrong. They kept running. The Persistence's point defense systems fired, not to destroy, but to disable. Precisely targeted bursts struck engine components, navigation systems, weapon mounts. Within 90 seconds, all three vessels were drifting. Powerless, but intact. More human Marines deployed, moving toward the disabled ships with grim purpose. In the council chamber, the representatives sat in absolute silence. They had just watched a species they considered young and inexperienced systematically dismantle a HFY war fleet with 1 cargo ship and 35 crew members. And the humans hadn't even seemed particularly challenged. Ambassador Chen stood and walked to the main display. She looked up at the image of human Marines securing the last HFY vessel. Their movements efficient and professional. "You're watching what we are beneath the diplomacy," she said to the council. "We're predators who learned to be civilized. Not civilized beings pretending to be strong. There's a fundamental difference. We know what we're capable of. We choose restraint. But when you threaten children, when you take hostages, and mock our attempts at peaceful resolution." She paused. "Then you see what we choose to do instead." The rescue operation began. Human Marines escorted thousands of refugees from the HFY vessels to the safety of their own ships. The refugees were frightened, traumatized, but unharmed. Every single hostage survived. The galaxy was learning a new lesson. Humans could be gentle. They could be kind. They could be diplomatic and civilized. But they could also be the most terrifying thing in the black. And they could switch between those modes with perfect clarity of purpose. The council chamber remained transfixed by the displays as the scope of the rescue operation became clear. Human Marines moved through the HFY vessels with remarkable gentleness now, guiding frightened refugees toward rescue shuttles. The contrast was jarring. These same soldiers, who had fought with such ferocity moments ago, were now helping elderly Vexillans walk, carrying Kordathi hatchlings, speaking in soft voices to traumatized families. Counselor Thorex leaned toward his aide. "They're like two completely different species. How can they change so quickly?" "Oh," Ambassador Chen heard him. She had excellent hearing, another predator trait. "They haven't changed at all, Counselor. They're simply applying appropriate responses to different situations. You fight enemies who threaten innocents. You help the innocents who were threatened. Both require training, discipline, and conscious choice." On the main display, a young human Marine knelt beside a group of Theran children who were huddled together, their crystalline forms flickering with fear. The Marine's helmet retracted, showing a man who couldn't have been older than 22. He pulled a ration bar from his kit and broke it into pieces, offering them to the children with a gentle smile. "It's okay," he said in accented but understandable Theran dialect. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. See? I've got snacks. My sister's kids love these things." The Theran children hesitantly accepted the food. One of them asked in a trembling voice, "Are you going to kill the bad people?" The Marine shook his head. "No. We're going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else, but we're not going to kill them. Killing should be the last choice, not the first. You understand?" Several council members noticed that this same Marine, according to the combat logs, had personally subdued 8 HFY warriors in the previous hour. Yet here he was, offering candy to frightened children and speaking to them about the value of life. Counselor Mevesh stood abruptly. "This cannot continue. Ambassador Chen, your warriors are effective, but this level of violence is disturbing to witness. We must consider stopping this operation and returning to diplomatic channels." Sarah turned to face her, and her expression was calm but unyielding. "With respect, Counselor Mevesh, diplomatic channels had 6 hours. You debated and discussed, while refugees waited to die. My people had 4 hours, and they acted. The violence you find disturbing saved 7,000 lives, but at what cost?" Mevesh pressed. "We saw your Marines fight with such ferocity. Such aggression. This is not how civilized species resolve conflicts, isn't it? Sarah walked to the center of the chamber, addressing all the assembled representatives. Let me ask you something. How many of your species have militaries? How many maintain defense forces, planetary guards, system patrols? Nearly every council member raised an appendage or made a gesture of acknowledgement. And what do those forces do? They train for conflict. Yes? They prepare for violence that you hope will never come? Of course, Thorex said, but we maintain those forces for defense only. We use them as a last resort, with proper authorization, following established protocols. So do we, Sarah replied. Every Marine you saw today is a volunteer. They trained for years. They follow strict rules of engagement. Captain Webb has a law degree specializing in interstellar conflict resolution. He knows the legal frameworks better than most judges. But here's what you need to understand. We don't separate our civilian and military capabilities the way you do. Every human ship can fight, if it must. Every human who goes into space knows how to respond to emergencies, because we come from a world that taught us one fundamental lesson. She paused, making eye contact with as many council members as possible. Adapt or die. Earth doesn't forgive weakness. Everything that survived on our planet learned to be dangerous when necessary. Prey animals developed venom, camouflage, herding behaviors. Predators developed pack tactics, persistence, intelligence. Humanity developed all of it. We're not warriors pretending to be civilized. We're civilized beings who remember how to be warriors. That's what makes us both trustworthy and dangerous. The main display shifted to show Captain Webb's face. He was on the bridge of the Persistence, and behind him, through the windows, the Kresh fleet hung in space, disabled but intact. He had requested permission to address the council directly. Counselors, Webb said, his voice tired but steady. I've been listening to your debate. I want to say something about what you've witnessed today. My crew didn't enjoy what we had to do. We took no pleasure in violence. But we made a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice to act when no one else could. He gestured to someone off-screen, and a holographic display appeared beside his image. It showed statistics, cold and clear. Kresh casualties, 2 dead, both from wounds sustained when they refused medical treatment. 47 injured, all receiving care from our medical teams. 317 restrained and awaiting proper legal proceedings. Human casualties, 0 dead, 6 minor injuries, already treated and returned to duty. Refugee casualties, 0, not one hostage harmed. Webb leaned forward, his weathered face filling the screen. We could have destroyed the Kresh fleet from a distance. The Persistence carries weapons you haven't seen yet, because we never needed to use them. We could have fired missiles, used our railguns, turned those ships into debris fields. It would have been safer for my crew, easier, faster, but we didn't, because every Kresh warrior on those ships is someone's son or daughter, someone's family. They made terrible choices, yes, but that doesn't mean they deserve to die if there's another option. So we risked our lives to take them alive. We boarded their ships and fought hand to hand, because it gave us control, precision, the ability to choose mercy, even in the middle of combat. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of experience. You think we're too violent, too aggressive, too willing to fight. But I ask you this, what would you have done? You had 6 hours and couldn't find an answer that didn't risk refugee lives. We had 4 hours and saved every single one. Yes, we used violence to do it, but we used precise, controlled, lawful violence against those who chose to be violent first. And we stopped the moment they surrendered. A new voice joined the conversation. It was the Kresh commander, broadcasting from his flagship. His tone had changed completely. The human speaks truth. I chose this path. I threatened innocents. I fired on their ship. I mocked their warnings. Everything that happened to my fleet, I brought upon myself and my warriors. The commander's image appeared on a secondary display. He was massive, intimidating even in restraints, but his posture showed defeat. I am a warrior of the Kresh Dominion. I have fought 27 battles. I have commanded fleets against 6 different species. I thought I understood combat. He shook his head slowly. I understood nothing. These humans fight like demons when they must, then treat our wounded like honored guests. They disabled our ships without destroying them. They could have killed us all, but they chose differently. His voice dropped lower. They asked me about my family. The human captain, after capturing my ship, after his warriors defeated my bridge crew, asked me if I had younglings. I told him I have 3 cubs. He showed me pictures of his daughters. Then he told me something I will never forget. He said, "The refugees you threatened have families too. Children who need their parents. Parents who need their children. You were willing to take that away to make a point. I'm willing to risk my life to protect it. That's the difference between us." The council chamber was utterly silent. The Kresh commander continued, "I accept full responsibility for my actions. My warriors will surrender to proper legal authority. But I ask the council to understand something. These humans are not excessive in their violence. They are restrained beyond any species I have encountered. They could have annihilated us. They chose mercy instead. If you fear them for their capability for violence, you are missing the point. Fear them if they ever stop choosing mercy. That is when they would become truly dangerous." Ambassador Chen spoke quietly. "We choose civilization every day. We choose diplomacy, cooperation, peace, and restraint. But we never forget that these are choices, not weaknesses. When someone threatens innocence, when someone makes violence unavoidable, we respond with the full capability we usually keep hidden. Not because we enjoy it, but because choosing to be civilized means nothing if you can't also choose to defend the civilization you've built." Yril, the Theron chairwoman, was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying a note of newfound respect. "The Council recognizes the effectiveness of the human response to this crisis. All 7,000 refugees are safe. The Kresh fleet is secured. No excessive casualties were inflicted. This outcome exceeds anything we could have achieved with conventional diplomatic methods." She paused, then added, "But we must discuss what this means for humanity's role in the Council. You have shown capabilities far beyond what we understood. This changes everything." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, it does. Because now you know what we really are. And we need to discuss what happens next. Not because we're a threat to the Council, but because maybe, just maybe, the galaxy needs species who remember how to be dangerous when necessary, as long as we remain committed to being civilized first." On the displays, human Marines continued evacuating refugees, treating wounded Kresh, and securing the captured vessels. They worked with professional efficiency, showing the same dedication to saving lives that they had shown to winning the fight. The Council was learning that humanity was neither purely peaceful nor purely violent. They were something more complex and potentially more valuable. They were civilized predators who had made a conscious choice about what they would be. And that choice made all the difference. 3 days after the incident, the Galactic Council convened in closed session. The ornate chamber held only senior members, their aides dismissed, their conversations shielded by privacy fields. This was a discussion that would shape policy for generations, and every species present understood the weight of the moment. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before them, alone. She had been summoned without her delegation, without Captain Webb, without any support staff. The message was clear: this conversation was about humanity's future in the galaxy, and it would be frank. Chairwoman Yril opened the session with unusual directness. "Ambassador Chen, we have reviewed all data from the refugee crisis. Combat logs, medical records, communications, sensor readings, everything. We have consulted with our military experts, legal advisors, and cultural specialists. We have one question that requires an honest answer before we proceed. Sarah nodded. Ask, how many ships like the Persistence does humanity actually have? The question hung in the air. Every council member leaned forward slightly, waiting for the answer that would tell them whether humanity was a potential ally or a potential threat that had been hiding in plain sight. Sarah smiled, but there was sadness in it. Every single one. Chairwoman. The Persistence isn't special. She's standard. Every human vessel that leaves Earth's system is built the same way civilian capabilities on the outside. Military capabilities hidden beneath. We don't build warships and cargo ships. We build ships that can be both. The council members exchanged glances. Councillor Vresh spoke carefully. Why? Why build civilian vessels with such excessive combat capability? Why? Moning. Because space is dangerous, Sarah replied simply. In our early days of space exploration, we lost 17 missions to various threats: pirates, territorial species, spatial anomalies, equipment failures in hostile situations. We learned that sending unprepared people into the black was murder. So we changed our approach. Every ship is built to survive. Every crew is trained to fight if they must. It's not about conquest or aggression. It's about survival. 40, looping May. In the PC, Thorax consulted a datapad. Our analysis suggests that any human cargo vessel could defeat most species' dedicated patrol craft. Your freighters are more capable than many military vessels. Is that a question or an observation? Sarah asked. Both, Mevesh interjected. We need to understand your intentions. You joined the council, presenting yourselves as explorers, traders, and diplomats. Now we discover you're also warriors of exceptional capability. This feels like deception. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. With respect, Counselor, we never lied. We told you we came from a death world. We told you our evolutionary history as apex predators. We told you about our planet's hostile environment, our history of conflict, our capacity for violence. You chose to interpret that information through the lens of your own experiences. You assumed that civilized meant harmless. That was your error, not our deception. But you concealed your true military strength, Vresh pressed. Did we? Sarah challenged. Or did we simply not volunteer information you didn't ask for? Every human vessel is registered accurately. Our technical specifications are on file. The Persistence's capabilities are exactly what we reported. She's a heavy cargo transport, with standard defensive systems. The fact that our standard defensive systems exceed your expectations isn't our fault. Yril made a calming gesture. This is not an accusation, Ambassador. But surely you can understand our concern. We have allowed a species into the Council without fully understanding their capabilities. Now we discover that humanity could, theoretically, field a merchant fleet that rivals some species' entire navies. Could we? Sarah asked quietly. Yes. Will we? That depends entirely on whether anyone gives us reason to. Chairwoman, let me explain something about Earth. We're a world that breeds survivors. Everything on our planet evolved to be dangerous because everything else was dangerous. Predators, prey, even our plants developed toxins and thorns. But you know what else Earth bred? Cooperation. She walked closer to the central podium. Humans survived because we learned to work together. We formed tribes, villages, cities, and nations. We fought each other. Yes, our history is bloody and complicated. But we also learned that cooperation achieves more than conflict. We built the United Nations. We ended world wars. We chose to reach for the stars together instead of destroying ourselves in nuclear fire. That choice defines us more than our capacity for violence. Pretty words, Counselor Vresh said, though not unkindly. But words don't change the reality of power. Sarah met his gaze steadily. What we've always done. We'll defend ourselves when threatened. We'll help others when we can. We'll follow the rules we've agreed to follow. And we'll be honest about what we are civilized beings who remember how to survive in an uncivilized universe. A new voice joined the conversation. Elder Counselor Nethys, a Brintali who rarely spoke, activated his communication panel. I have a different question, Ambassador Chen. During the crisis, Captain Webb had the Kresh commander at his mercy. The human forces could have executed every Kresh warrior with legal justification under the laws of armed conflict. They chose not to. Why? Because taking a life should be the last choice, not the first. Sarah answered immediately. We believe in proportional response. The Kresh threatened violence, but hadn't yet killed anyone, so we stopped them without killing them when possible. It's not weakness. It's discipline. Discipline. Nethys repeated, tasting the word. Yes. I have reviewed your species' military history extensively over the past 3 days. Do you know what I found most remarkable? Not your capacity for violence, but your capacity to stop. You could have used nuclear weapons to win World War II, faster you had them. You didn't. You could have continued many conflicts to total victory. You chose peace instead. Throughout your history, humans have shown the ability to choose restraint even when victory through violence was possible. He looked at the other council members. This is not a species that hides weakness behind civilization. This is a species that chooses civilization. Despite their strength, there is a profound difference. Mavesh spoke thoughtfully. The Kresh commander said something in his statement. He said we should fear humans if they ever stop choosing mercy. He suggested that their current restraint is more impressive than their combat capability. He's right, Sarah said simply. What you saw wasn't us at our most dangerous. It was us being as gentle as the situation allowed. If we ever stop trying to be gentle, if we ever embrace violence as a first resort instead of a last choice, then you should be terrified. But we won't. It's not who we choose to be. Thorex studied her carefully. How can you be certain? Because we've already been pushed past our limits, Sarah replied. We've survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, nuclear standoffs, and near-extinction events. We've seen what happens when we stop choosing mercy. It nearly destroyed us multiple times. We learned. We chose differently, and we teach every generation about those choices, so they'll make better ones. Yril consulted with several council members in whispered conversations. Finally, she spoke formally. The council has a proposal. We would like to offer humanity an expanded role within the galactic community. Specifically, we want to establish a new position: protectors of refugee corridors. This role would give human vessels authority to respond to distress calls in designated humanitarian zones with whatever force is deemed necessary. She paused, then added, several species have expressed that they would feel safer knowing human ships patrol the trade routes where their civilians travel. Not because they fear you, but because they trust that you will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. You want us to be your enforcers? No. Nethys corrected gently. We want you to be our guardians. There is a difference. Enforcers impose will. Guardians protect the vulnerable. From what we've seen, humans excel at the latter. Counselor Mavesh added, this would also require full council membership for humanity, with voting rights equal to founding species. We cannot ask you to take such responsibility without giving you appropriate voice in council decisions. Several of you voted to delay our membership application, Sarah noted. What changed? Vresh answered honestly. We feared your predator nature. We worried that a species evolved for violence couldn't be trusted in civilized society. But we were wrong. The predator species we should fear are those who don't know they're predators. You know exactly what you are, and you've chosen to use that nature to protect rather than dominate. That makes you trustworthy in ways we didn't understand before. Uriel stood formally. We are also proposing something unprecedented. We want to establish exchange programs where human military advisors train Council species defense forces. Not to make them more aggressive, but to teach them what we saw in the refugee crisis: precision, discipline, and the ability to protect without excessive destruction. You want us to teach other species how to fight like humans? Sarah asked carefully. We want you to teach other species how to think like humans, Nethys clarified. How to make hard choices quickly. How to accept responsibility for violence when it's necessary. How to stop when it's over. These are skills most council species lack. We avoid conflict so thoroughly that when it becomes unavoidable, we have no framework for managing it ethically. Sarah considered carefully. This would fundamentally change humanity's role in the galaxy. We would go from newcomers to protectors, from observers to active participants in galactic security. Yes, Uriel confirmed. It is a significant responsibility. We understand if you need time to consult with Earth Command. I don't need to consult, Sarah said quietly. I know what they'll say. We came to the stars, looking for friends, for trading partners, for new knowledge and experiences. We didn't come looking to be warriors. But if people need protection, if children need guardians, if the innocent need someone willing to stand between them and those who would harm them, she paused. Then we'll do it. Because that's who we choose to be. The council chamber was silent for a moment. Then Uriel spoke with formal authority. Let it be recorded. Humanity is granted full council membership with immediate effect. The position of protector of refugee corridors is established, with human forces authorized to respond to threats against civilian populations using appropriate force. Exchange programs will begin within 30 standard days. She paused, then added something more personal. Ambassador Chen, I must admit something. When your species first applied for council membership, I voted to delay. I believed you were too young, too aggressive, too dangerous. I was wrong. Not about your danger, you are dangerous, but about what that danger means. A galaxy needs both builders and protectors. We have many species excellent at building. We needed one willing to protect. Sarah nodded slowly. We'll try to be worthy of that trust. But understand something. We'll protect everyone. Not just council members. Not just allies. If someone needs help, if innocents are threatened, we'll respond regardless of politics or profit. That's not negotiable. We wouldn't want it any other way, Nethys said with what might have been approval. The session concluded with formal votes and documentation. As Sarah prepared to leave, Mevesh approached her privately. Ambassador, a question if I may. What would have happened if the creche had killed hostages before the persistence arrived? Sarah's expression went very still. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried absolute certainty. Then you would have seen something worse than what you witnessed. You saw us being precise, disciplined, restrained. You saw us following rules, treating wounded enemies, choosing mercy if those refugees had died. She paused. Then you would have seen what humans become when we stop being civilized. When we stop following rules, when we remember that before we built cities and laws and councils, we were pack hunters who never, ever let prey escape. Mevesh stiffened. You would have killed them all. Every single one, Sarah confirmed without hesitation. No prisoners, no restraint, no mercy. Because the only thing we hate more than violence is those who harm children. That's the line you don't cross. The creche commander was wise enough not to cross it. Be grateful. She walked toward the exit, then paused and looked back. You asked what you should fear. Counselor, don't fear us fighting to protect people. Fear us fighting for revenge. You've never seen that. Pray you never do. Sarah left the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. Behind her, the council members sat in contemplation. They had made their decision. Humanity would be protectors, guardians, and partners in building a safer galaxy. But they had also received a warning. Humans chose civilization. They chose mercy. They chose restraint. But those choices had limits. And the galaxy would be wise to remember that the most dangerous predator isn't the one actively hunting. It's the one that has decided not to hunt, but could change its mind if given sufficient reason. Outside the council building, Sarah opened a communication channel to Earth Command. This is Ambassador Chen. The vote passed. We're full council members now, with protection authority over refugee corridors. Prepare to deploy additional vessels to designated sectors. The response came from Admiral Okoye, whose weathered face showed satisfaction. Understood, Ambassador. How did they react to learning about our actual capabilities? About as well as expected. Concerned, but accepting. They understand now that we're not hiding weakness. We're choosing strength, applied carefully. And if they ever threaten us? Okoye asked carefully. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Then they'll learn the same lesson the Kresh learned. We're civilized by choice, not necessity. And we're much more dangerous when that choice is taken away from us. Let's hope it never comes to that, Okoye said. Agreed, Sarah replied. Because if it does, the galaxy will discover what it really means when humans stop asking nicely. The communication ended. Sarah looked up at the alien sky, at the strange constellations that represented humanity's new home among the stars. They had come so far from Earth, from the savannah where their ancestors first learned to hunt, first learned to think, first learned to choose. Now they would protect others who couldn't protect themselves. Not because they were forced to, but because it was the right thing to do. Because civilization meant nothing if you weren't willing to defend it. And because sometimes the galaxy needed predators who remembered that with great power came the responsibility to choose how that power was used. Humanity had made their choice. They would be guardians, protectors, and friends. But they would also be the reminder that peace was a choice made by those capable of war, and that the strongest civilizations were built by those who could choose violence, but preferred peace instead. The galaxy was learning, and humanity was ready to teach.